Can you hear us okay?
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay, great. Yeah, so you weren't here for a meeting yesterday. I'm a couple of people who have classes to go to. This works
Okay.
out as a little bit better timing. So I did update the calendar and stuff. Hopefully that's helpful.
Okay.
Has everybody found the calendar? Everybody knows how to use that?
Yeah.
It's just Gmail. You just
Calendar, right?
go to the applications and choose calendar. You should see stuff updates there. Okay. Out of the stuff I'm working on. I think it's in a good enough state. That probably works everything. And then all right, so step one, beginning of new classes for the first little bit anyway, for the purpose of practicing this stuff. I'm going to go into GitLab. I'm going to go back to our group, and I'm going to create a new project. Feel free to follow along if you want to do the same thing for yourself. So I would recommend that if you're going to do it, go inside of the group individual projects, and then inside of the group for yourself. And then you probably want to create a group called classes or something just for organizational structure. And inside of there, create a project. I am going to do it inside of the base level classes. And then you guys will have access to this moving forward. So we have the Git example from yesterday. I'm going to create a new project. And I'm just going to call it variables. So all I did was go into the group, and then I clicked new project, big green button on the right, upper right. And,
Hey, Sam, I don't think you.
I'm sorry? Oh, I'm sorry, yeah, I forgot to hit the other button. There's so many buttons, man. All right, yeah, just let me know if I do something stupid. Happens all the time. All right, you good now?
Yeah.
Good. All right, so I just created a new project inside of fall interns, inside of class, inside of variables, or inside of classes called variables. I'm going to copy that. I'm going to go into our home directory, internship, classes, and then I'm going to git clone variables. And we can see when I open up RubyMine here, I actually have the variables project alongside our Git example project. Go into the README. There you go. We've got variables. Okay. So what's the first thing I need to do now if I want to start working in terms of Git?
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's my thing. All right, so we're local right now, so we need to make that move from local to up.
Yeah, so it's all right. So we want to pull. First thing we want to do when we start is we want to pull from remote to local, which is what I just did with git clone. So I'm up to date. My local is the same. My local master is the same as the remote master right now. So, but before I start working, do I want to just start working on master?
No.
You
want
to get a branch. I want to create a branch. So that's what we're gonna do next.
I'm kind of lost on the clone part.
Okay, so git clone, all that does is, because I don't have the repo yet, it just says, it's the exact same thing as git pull origin master, but because I don't have the repo yet, it also clones the directory name. So it's...
So do you have the CD into...
Nope, you can do it from anywhere. I could go to... here. I could go to /. which is just the root of my computer, or I could go into, here, I'll just go to my desktop. Okay, and then I can git clone, and it's just gonna pull it down.
Okay.
So what's actually happening is that it's pulling down the whole directory, including a folder. Here, when I go inside of there. So now I'm inside of the variables project. By LSAL, there's a folder called .git.
Mm-hmm.
That has all the information about this repository in terms of Git. So it knows that its origin is from GitLab. It knows what the path is to get there from GitLab. It knows about all the commits that have been done so far. That's like the metadata about everything that we're doing in terms of Git. So when I do git clone, it not only does the pull from origin master, but it also gets that .git file, and it also pulls down the whole directory.
Okay. And then for me, it said you appear to have cloned an empty repository.
It might say that. Mine might have said that too, because all it has in it right now is the README.
Okay.
Or you probably didn't click the README button. So if you did your own, there when you're creating the project, there's a little checkbox that says, "Would you like to initialize with the README?" You didn't click it. It's no big deal. It doesn't matter. But as a result, there's nothing in there yet, which is totally fine. You still get the .git, and you can start working on your stuff. And then it doesn't matter where it actually is on your computer. The only reason why we're putting it locally where we put it is for us to be able to talk in the same language.
Okay.
But like I could work on this one that's on my desktop, and it does the exact same effect as putting it somewhere else. So I'm going to go back to the one that we were using though. So I'm going to back to internship, classes, variable. All right, and then we can get, so we need to check out a branch. Check out B, Sam, first look at variables. And if I type get status, I should see that I'm on branch. Sam get first look at variables. If I type get branch, I should see that I'm on Sam first look at variables. I'm not on master anymore. Okay.
What was the git fetch that you ran?
Git fetch just says go get all of the branches that currently exist on the remote repository. So if there were other branches, like if somebody else had pushed a branch, it would pull it down. Yeah, and then I could play with it locally. Does that make sense?
So you'd always want to do that, probably.
You actually don't want to do that, generally speaking, unless you have some reason to work on somebody else's branch. Or every once in a while, I'll get master in a bad state accidentally. So I'll do git branch master dash capital D, which destroys master locally. And then I'll do git fetch just to quickly get it back. But generally speaking, you don't want to do it because if you have like 12 branches happening and you only care about the one you're working on, when you do git fetch, you're pulling down a whole bunch of data that you just don't care about. So, okay,
cool.
Everybody cool?
I need to get Git.
You need to get Git on the Microsoft machine.
I think you have to. Oh, you're on the Microsoft.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you'll have to install it. I think there's a installer from the App Store or somewhere.
I was just saying. Like,
Yeah. All right. So now we are inside of the branch Sam first look at variables. So now we can start to get to work. All right. So when you guys have been reading a little bit, this is not so. Whenever I'm asking questions, again, don't freak out. It's not about like getting the right answer. I really don't care. I'm just interested in giving you opportunities to be able to practice and learn. So if I wanted to start working with some JavaScript locally, does anybody have any idea how I would go about doing that?
Well, what do you just want to write code?
I just want to write code.
You can go in any project and just get a JS file and start writing.
Yeah, so I created a JS file. So let's just call it app.js. Doesn't matter what I name it. RubyMine does a thing where it'll do the get add piece, the staging piece for you automatically. That's what this pop-up's about. So it's going to do get add this file when I click add. Okay, that's why it's green. Okay, it'll turn red if it's not committed, etc. Okay, so I've got an app.js file. So I can start writing code, but what's going to execute this code? How do I get the code to actually do something? Yeah. This is somewhat of a trick question because you guys have been reading a lot about JavaScript as a language, but you haven't done a lot in terms of like making it like how. So in Rails, you can go into the Rails console and you can make things happen, or in Python, you can do something similar, I'm sure. How would I make what runs JavaScript?
You need an HTML file.
Yeah, so I need an HTML file because what, Ben?
Do you embed this into HTML file?
Because that's where you put the JavaScript script at.
That's right. So, but what is it that actually is going to run the JavaScript code? What's going to execute the JavaScript code?
The browser.
The browser. Okay. So that's the cool thing about these front-end technologies. We're going to use JavaScript. We're going to use HTML. What's actually happening, and you may not have realized this using web technologies before, but HTML, JavaScript, and CSS, what's actually happening when you hit a particular website is that you're downloading files that have CSS, JavaScript, and HTML in them. It's not code executing on the server. It downloads those files, and then the browser executes anything that's HTML, CSS, or JS. Okay, so all those things are run by your browser. You can run JavaScript in other ways. So Node is a way of running it from the command line. So we can use Node to do this. You've seen Node servers. That's how they work. So there are other ways of executing JavaScript. But the originating source of running JavaScript was the browser. It was started. JavaScript was a language that was created way back with Netscape Navigator. Do you guys even have that? You don't know what I'm talking about. I'm so old.
Oh God, Netscape.
Netscape Navigator was like the cool thing to use way back in the day, before the Google Chromes of the world. But JavaScript is what made it so cool as a browser because you could then do manipulations that went beyond what typical HTML would do. So you didn't just have to have static content. You could have dynamic content. You can make things move on and off the screen. And that's what eventually leads to Web 2.0, which is where you don't have to refresh the page every single time that you go look for new data. Okay? So we need an app.js file, and then to get it to execute, HTTP is it stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol. The reason for that is that originally people wanted to be able to pass data around in sort of a nicer way, in a better regulated, more structured way. And the way that they decided to do that was through the use of HTML, okay, Hypertext Markup Language. So HTML gets passed over HTTP, and so the protocols for sending and receiving that type of data, you have to have HTML to start with. You need something that's HTML. Then from there, you can do things like load JavaScript in, and the browser can execute it, or you can load CSS in, and the browser can execute it, but the protocol passes just HTTP. HTML. HTML is very similar to what's called XML, which is just an adaptation of it. But you guys might be familiar already with JSON, which is just like a string version of JavaScript notation. HTML works in a very similar way, in that it structures the data that's going across in a way that is searchable and is hierarchical, and there's a way that the computer can process it. So that's why they send everything in HTML, and then from there it says, okay, now in the HTML, I'm going to tell the browser that I want to go get a JavaScript file. I want to go get a CSS file. Okay. So it's a lot of deep stuff. You don't have to know most of that to get started, but I just wanted to give you guys a little bit of background. So, big thing though, we do need an HTML file, so we're just going to create a new file called index.html. You guys have any idea why I'm calling it index? And not like app or...
the HTML goes.
Yeah, because that's where all the HTML goes.
Yeah, I know
Yeah.
why.
No, so index was the... it just by default, when you point a browser to a directory, if you don't put anything after the slash, so if you don't name the whole file, by default, it will look for an index.html file. So that's why we do
Any
that.
reason why?
I'm sure there was some idea behind it back in the day, but no. So you call it index.html, that's always like your root HTML file, and it's simply because that way you don't have to name the file. If I named it app.html, that would be fine, but then my URL would have to be fullmeasure.io/app.html. If I do fullmeasure.io, it's going to look for a file called index.html by default. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. So we're in an index.html file. We're going to have to start building out some actual HTML. There are some things that technically are standards. So you're supposed to do doctype type equals HTML. Modern browsers, it doesn't matter. It's going to figure it out. You should probably do that if you're doing production stuff, but like when you do stencil, you'll see they templatize all that. So you don't need to worry about that so much. We're going to start with HTML. This is just saying, hey, inside of here is some HTML. So I want you to parse it. HTML is hierarchical. I mentioned that before. So it always starts with a single parent, and then it goes down through children. So we have to start with single parent. That's what the HTML gives us there. Inside of there, we're going to have a head and a body. These are known as components or tags. Anybody know what the difference between the data that goes in head and the data that goes in body is?
Is that the tab name?
Head is where the tab name goes. So that should give you a clue, potentially. Do you guys...
Well, body is just like what shows up on the page.
Body is what shows up on the page. And so if head has something like the tab, what do you think the differentiator is between what's body and what's head?
Mm-hmm.
Here, let's take a look at, if I look at this GitLab page, and I look, so they start, same thing, see they have doctype HTML up there. That's just telling the browser this is an HTML document, but everything is HTML, so it never has, it always just assumes that. HTML class saying the language is English, and it's got some scripts, and then we have a head, and inside of there we have this meta tag saying we're going to use a char set of UTF-8. We have some links to go get some CSS and other things. We have meta information like object GitLab, full measure.
Is head actually in terms of like, it's actually the header contents of like the package you're going to send across the internet.
Yeah, more specifically though, it's just metadata. So it's not the actual content of the site. It's not the stuff that you're seeing here. It's just meta information. So this is where you put things like these meta name tags are helping the browser to interpret, or they're helping search engines to know how to set up. Like when you're searching, you see sometimes on Google you have like menu items that are in the Google display results.
Mm-hmm.
That is set up through the meta stuff. Other things like the title of the tab are set up here. This is also where you include like your JavaScript scripts. This is where you include your CSS scripts, etc. And then the body is where you have your actual page content. Okay.
Oh, okay, that's different from last time.
Okay.
I was referring to like a header packet in terms of like
Oh.
Way too.
Yeah, that's like so
Way too.
many levels deeper on the TCP stuff. Yeah. Yep. Okay, so in head is where we're gonna put things like script source equals app.js. I think that's what I do for. Okay. All right. So why did I do script source equals app.js?
Because that's what we're defining or our scripting. Like what file is our script?
Yep. What if I did something like that? Is this gonna work? So I moved app.js into a directory.
Yeah, because it would work if you specified that path, correct?
Yeah.
But the problem is the path is looking in its current folder.
Right.
For that.
Right. So index.html is directly inside of the variables folder. It's not inside of JS. So it's looking for app.js inside of variables, but it's actually inside of JS.
Mm-hmm.
So if we want to get there, we have to do something like that. And RubyMine tries to help you by realizing that's not there. Okay? All right. So I'm going to move it back out there. There's no need to do that. It's just that typically you'll see that happens fairly frequently, and so it's good to be aware that your path is important there. All right, so we'll just go back to app.js. All right. So first thing you need to know in any language that you're playing with, and I say this somewhat hesitantly because I didn't know anything about debugging tools for years and years of development, you need a debugger because it's going to make your life a whole lot easier. So there's two types of debugging tools that you use in JavaScript. The first one is console.log. Hello world. And all that's going to do, it just prints whatever you put into it, which is really nice because we'll see like it'll print the variables and that type of thing. So you can use this to log as it's executing through your code. So now if I go to, and this is great because everything's run through the browser, I can just open this from my local machine. I can just go to classes variables, index.html, open it up. It opens up in the browser. I can open up my inspector, my DevTools, and there we go. Hello world. Okay, so it shows hello world in the console because that's what I wrote. Okay. The second tool is a debugger. It's an actual debugger. It's the word debugger. So if you want to stop at any particular point, you can just write debugger. Okay. So now, if I refresh the page, it reruns that script, and we'll see that order is very important. We'll see places where it's not, it's less important, and where there's problems with that. But generally speaking, code executes from top to bottom, left to right. Okay. So here we're doing console world, so we have that. We have our debugger. It's stopped right here. There's some interesting tools that we'll get into in terms of other debugging, but the big one that you need to know is when you click this button, it'll continue. Okay, and we'll get into a little bit more about how you can use this and fanciness of debugging. But so now I'm stopped. I have not yet printed goodbye. This is the end, right? And that's because I'm stuck on this debugger, so we haven't gotten to line 3 yet. So I'm going to click go, and then we should see goodbye. This is the end. Okay. So wherever I put the debugger, it stops it. Only when I click the go button does it continue. Does that make sense? Okay. So that's basic debugging. All right. So now let's start to get into variables a little bit. So who wants to tell me what a variable is in programming?
Storage.
Storage. Okay.
Renaming of something.
Okay, I like that one better. So the way that I talk about variables is that variables are an alias. Okay, so it's just another way of referencing something else that came before. And in many cases, variables, when we start to get into the RESTful world, they're things that you don't necessarily know exactly what they are. You just know that they generally have a structure of such and such. So what I mean by that is, if I were to say hit an endpoint to Rotten Tomatoes and say, give me back the top 10 movies, what those top 10 movies are is going to change every time. Mm-hmm. So I'm not, as a human, I can look at it when it comes back down, but when you're in the code, it doesn't know. All it knows is that it generally has the structure of each one of these items in the array is an object that has a title, that has a star rating, that has a published date, etc. And so you can call those attributes and show them on the screen. So variables oftentimes, as we're going to see, are not actually defined per se in the code, but they're defined on a server, and then you request the information and then assign them into your variable and go from there. Okay. We're going to start with very explicitly defined variables, though. We're going to think of them as aliases. That is, I think, the best way to sort of wrap your head around what variables are. It is difficult when you first get into programming to understand what this is. You guys are a little bit more senior, so you probably have done this before. I don't care. We're still going to step back to the basics, and we're going to go through this. Okay. All right. So we're going to start with the very basics in JavaScript. We're just going to create a variable. We're just going to name it sum. This is a super contrived example. We're going to say sum equals 10 plus 20. And then after that, we're going to put in a console log and a debugger. And we can just put some. Put a debugger in just above that. All right. So when I execute this code, who wants to tell me what they think is going to happen? By the way, we're going to do a lot of reading of code where you're going to walk through it and try and explain to me what's happening. It's just a useful way of seeing if you understand how this code works before you have to go do it on your own. All right. So what do you think is going to happen here?
Probably going to error out.
You think it's going to error?
Yeah, you need a let in front of some, right?
Well, I know that's what Flatiron taught you because that's what they made me teach too. We're going to go over what let and const are in a moment. You actually don't need them, and var. You actually don't need them. It is a thing that is a best practice that's becoming more and more of a practice, and you'll need them when we get to TypeScript, but JavaScript itself doesn't actually require it. Right, but if we were to run this, let's just start with line 1. What's happening on line 1?
The addition of 10 and 20.
The addition of 10 and 20
Being stored
is being assigned or stored in some. Okay. Yeah. I know it's obvious, but we're just, okay. Then on line 2, what's going to happen?
we're halting.
We're going to stop, right?
We're gonna break.
Yep, we're going to stop there. We're going to be at our breakpoint. And then how do I continue again?
Press continue.
Press continue, and then what's going to happen?
It's going to be printed to the console.
So what's going to be printed to the console?
30.
30. Yeah, I tried to make you guys do really hard math here. So, okay. So let's just see that actually happen. So there we go. We stopped. There's an interesting thing about the debugging tool. There's several really interesting things here. One is you can just put your cursor over variables, and it'll give you a little highlight of what that thing is at that point in time. You can also, inside a scope, you can see all kinds of information that exists currently that you have access to. Which is that's the global scope, so that's a window that you can actually see there. Trying to see if there's anything else that's interesting at the moment. Nope, not really. Okay, so then we can click continue, and then it's going to print some to the console, which is 30. Now when we're talking about variables, there's different types of variables. We saw this is a little different than when I did console log hello world. So we're just gonna, what's the difference between hello world and 30 there?
Oh, one's an integer.
Uh-huh.
And one's a string.
One's a string. And that's represented in the console simply by the string being black and the integer being, or a number being blue. Does that make sense? Okay. So, let's try some stuff. I think it's a little weird in JavaScript.
Get to the console.
Oh, okay. So if you right click and then go to inspect, or Command Option I is the other way, you'll get something that looks like this. I don't know if your console will be down here, but you can always click on the tab at the top that says console and then get a full.
Yeah.
And that's all that matters for us at the moment. All right. All right. So what if I do something like this? What is sum going to be?
It's gonna be 1020, I think, because like it has a string and you're going to concatenate it with the other one.
Yeah. So concatenation in JavaScript is done with a plus. And so concatenation is when you take two strings and you put them together. So because there's a string in the concatenation, it doesn't know to do addition. And so it does that. If I do this,
Is that not going to break?
it's 30.
What?
So JavaScript is weird. There's some strange ways that it deals with data and it tries to interpolate things back and forth. I just want to make you aware of some of these strange nuances so that if you run into it and you're like, what the heck is going on? You can at least be like, okay, there may be some sanity to this. JavaScript's a little weird. TypeScript, when we get to that, which is what we're going to use most of the time for our development purposes, does a much better job of not allowing that to happen. Okay, so we'll get to that. All right, so that's great. All right, so now let's just do something like first name, okay, equals Sam, last name equals Birk. Okay, there's a couple things I want to talk about. I have a semicolon at the end of line 1. I don't have a semicolon at the end of line 2. Do you guys know what the difference is between that? Yeah, nothing, like in terms of how it executes. You should have a semicolon from a best practice perspective, but new line breaks count as semicolons in JavaScript. So the advantage of the semicolon, and this is true in Rails too when we get there, is that if you wanted to, you could do something like that in JavaScript, and then you need the semicolon. Okay. Now I don't know why you would do that. It's not very readable. It's not a great idea. So it really frustrates me that we have to put semicolons in JavaScript because I just want to do this, and technically you can. But it's a very similar thing, Ben, to the let and the const stuff. It's things that are best practices, but they're not actually enforced by the browser.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. So let's talk a minute about let and const, because these are things that you will run into in TypeScript when we get to stencil, and it's going to yell at you and it'll make you actually choose one or the other. Yeah. Who knows the difference between? So here, let me do it this way first. Var is how you used to do this up to like 3 years ago in JavaScript. You would type var and then first name and then var last name. And that just says, hey, I'm declaring a variable. Now you either use let or you use const. Who knows or can guess at what the difference between those two are?
Const, it's constant, so that can't be reassigned.
Can't be reassigned, whereas let can. Okay, so if I try to do, it's going to get mad. Even RubyMind's even telling me that. Mm. Now, technically, I'm not sure what the browser's actually going to do here. No, it does actually identify that. Okay, so once you use const or let, it does have an impact on how the browser interprets it. But if you don't do anything, it just assumes var, it assumes old JavaScript, and it just lets it all go. All right, so that's the difference between const and let. Now, const does become a little weird because you use const sometimes when you wouldn't expect that that might be the case. So, for example, let me create a variable const person equals first name. All right, so let's just start here because this is new syntax. What's happening here?
We're setting a tuple of some sort, so like
setting the whole thing to
key value.
Setting the whole thing to person, and then what is the whole thing? So tuple is a way of talking about it. What's some other terms that you might?
A map.
A map is closer. Yeah, it's generally referred to as a hash or an object in JavaScript. And so what we're doing here is we're creating an object that's a person that has two attributes, first name and last name, and then we can reference them in JavaScript by doing something like or either one of those work. This syntax becomes particularly useful when you have a variable for the key. You don't know what the key is going to be. You can't do person.key because that would look for the attribute key and it doesn't exist. But you could do something like no, so that only works for arrays, which we'll get to in a second. But so that's the same. Does that make sense? Remember, variables are an alias. Key is just an alias for first name. We're just putting person first name. Okay, and this and that are the same. Now, another thing that's interesting, you might have noticed in console log, I'm going to print out two different things in a single console log. And it does it just fine. In fact, I can put any of these things. which is nice when you're trying to, like it's possible. A lot of times I'll do something like put a message for myself, like this is the person. I don't write things that are this long, but that you are concerned about comma person. Okay, so then I have a message to indicate to me what the debugging is that I'm trying to do, and then you also get the full object that you can click on and see that. Okay, just a little interesting too. All right, so I did const person. So can I do person dot last name equals John?
Yes.
Why?
Yeah, why?
I guess because const is only like protecting you from reassigning the like final like variable that's on the left, but it is not protecting anything that's inside of that object.
That's right. Okay. So const just protects you from reassigning that specific variable, but not any of its underlying pieces. So if it was an array and you modified the array, or it was an object and you modified the object, that's fine. So that's one of the ways that const is weird. Second way that const is weird when we get to loops is that when you declare something like for so you can't do that one. So you can't do this one because I itself is getting updated. But what you could do is if I create an array of people. Okay. And I did, let's say we iterate over those. Syntax is different though. It's going to be
It's ES6.
because it doesn't let me do that. I'll find the example. There's an example of doing a loop where you declare the changing item as it goes over. I think it's like as if you do a for, that's what it's like, for const person in people. Yeah, so it's weird because person's going to change every time. We're going to get into loops and explain why that's the case, but person's going to change every time, but you declare it as a constant because on each iteration it's a parameter that doesn't change, that you don't modify. Okay, unless you're going to modify it inside. Okay, it's just weird places where const is used.
Where do you use that?
Yeah, so you could totally just use the let. TypeScript will actually figure out in RubyMine when you use the right tsconfig stuff. We'll set it all up the right way. RubyMine will tell you when you're using the right one or the wrong one. So the IDE is going to help you solve this problem anyway. But it's just I'm just pointing out that there's some strange things that happen.
That's tough because I mean, I was okay with what you said about updating the person, updating that data inside, but then what you just showed me with that for loop, you change the whole thing.
Yeah, it changes every time. Yeah, it's strange. I don't know if it's bad implementation or if it's intentional, and I just don't understand the reasoning, but that's how it works. So I just wanted to make you guys aware. These are not big things. The big things that we're trying to get out of today are what are variables, what are the different data types that we have, how can we use them, and what are they useful for. Okay, so we've gone over a few. So we've done strings, we've done numbers. We see that we can do addition and subtraction and multiplication, all those things on numbers. We've done objects. Objects are groupings of attributes that go together. We touched on an array there for a second. An array is just a list of items where that item can be any data type. Okay, so we did a list of strings a second ago. I said people equals Sam, Jane, Jim. Okay, so that's just a list of strings. arrays are useful because you can iterate over them. So oftentimes, like if you make a request to Rotten Tomatoes, you're going to get a list of 10 movies, and you're going to loop over them and show that list on the page. But just as easy as an array can be a list of strings, it can also be a list of objects. So I could do something like this, for example. And so what is people going to be?
An array.
Yeah, an array of, it's going to be an array with how many things in it?
2 attributes.
2 attributes, but how many things is the array, how many items is the array going to have in this?
Just one object.
It's just one object. Yeah, and we'll see that. So I can actually do, we'll put a debugger in and I'll play around a little bit. Actually, I'm going to put a debugger up here because we can see a couple more things with the debugger tool here. So here we stopped person, last name, right? I can scroll over these things and see a little bit about what's going on. I can type person into the console and it'll tell me exactly what it is right now, which is kind of a nice little feature. I can do person of first name. What happens if I type people in right now?
We're gonna get to Birk. Well, what you?
Right now.
Oh, I forgot we got the debugger. We got the debugger.
Where? Yeah,
People is not a thing.
It's a bit null right now.
Yeah, we'll get null or undefined, I think, right now, because we haven't quite gotten to the assignment of people yet. So we stopped before it got assigned. So people's not defined yet. So we can step through our functions. So before we just click this, and what that'll do is take us all the way to the end. Okay, but I can step through by using this function here. And it's just going to do one line at a time. So there we go. So now I can type people, or I can scroll over people, because as you can see with the blue line indicating where we've assigned people. And right now people is Sam, Jane, and Jim, right? So if I click this again, now what is people?
Object.
It's going to be the object. It's going to be an array with one item in it. That one item is going to be the object that we previously assigned to person. So the people, an array, has one item in it at index 0 with an object that has first name and last name. So if I wanted to print out Birk right now, how would I do that?
Well, actually, we have a couple of different ways.
Okay.
You could go. Let's try to go people 0.
Why 0?
Because that's its index. It's the first item in the.
It's the first item always starts 0. Yep.
Dot.
Yep.
Access?
Yep.
Dot, okay. Dot. Wait. What are you gonna print?
Birk. Yeah.
Last.
Oh, I must have. It must be.
No.
Oh no.
Oh, and people
it's
is
person.
John. No.
People we set to.
Person.
you reassign
Oh,
last
it's
name.
right here. It's right here. It's right here. It's right here.
Updated, yeah.
Okay, so here we'll walk all the way through it. Okay. That's cool. I got myself. Okay, so person right now, and this is why we have debuggers. It's beautiful. You get to walk through this stuff and see. Person right now is first name Sam, last name Birk. That's all saying, makes lots of sense. All right, I'm gonna go to the next line. What's person now? Now person is first name Sam, last name John, because we assigned last name to be John because we were trying to show the const thing. Okay, now people is what? Yep, an array of Sam, Jane, and Jen. So, okay, great. But now people is what?
An array with the one object in it.
Yep, an array with the one hash or the one object in it, which is what? Which is
No,
yeah,
Sam Birk.
Same job.
Sam John.
Oh, right.
Because we
Last
changed the
name.
last name.
Okay.
Yep, yep. So first name Sam, last name John. Okay.
Mhm.
I'm going to push you guys a little bit more than that in the future to be more explicit about. So I need you to say things like, it's an array with one object in it that has two attributes. The first attribute is first name with the value of Sam. The second one is a attribute of last name with the value of John. Okay, just so, because I don't know at what point you're skipping because you don't know, or you're skipping because you're like, that's obvious. And so I just need you to communicate to me so I can figure it out. Okay? All right. Everybody cool with what's happened though?
Mm-hmm. So you can't print Birk, or you'd have to change the last name to print John to Birk?
You'd have to change the last name back to Birk or get rid of this line. So now if I do it,
That would be good.
I could do people 0 dot last name and I'll get Birk. Yep. So now that I understand where it was getting changed to John, I can go back and I can fix it. Make sense? All right. So I just did my G push. So now that exists on GitLab. So we can go back into here. If I look at variables, I now have, I'm meaning to do, oh, because I'm on my branch. Okay. So if I go change branches, variables, there's 2 branches now. If I go look at Sam first, look at variables, I have 2 files. One's app.js. Look at that, and one of them is index.html. Go look at that. Cool? Everybody good? That makes sense? Good. All right. Step 2. So that was the big thing. That's where we're trying to get through today. We're just trying to get to the point of having some idea of what variables are. I am going to go ahead and create a merge request here and then probably merge it just so that it's on master and you guys can see. Oops. Lesson number 2 is if-else statements and booleans. So before, maybe the way that we'll finish today is just talking for a moment about booleans and what those are, because that'll be instructive for next time. Okay. All right. I'm not going to create a new branch or anything. I'm not going to push anything again. So that'll all stay the same. We're just going to play around in the playground right now. All right. So let's just start with how would I make something, how would I assign something to true, do you think? Any non-zero value in JavaScript will typically give you back true. Yeah, but how would I do it more explicit, like the right way?
True.
Yep, it's literally the word true is a special keyword they're called, something that JavaScript cares about, like let. And true is the Boolean form of true. And if I wanted to reassign it to false, how do I do that? Yeah. Sometimes they're trick questions, sometimes there's not. That's what the trick is. All right, so if I console log out something, what am I going to get? False. And you see it's blue, much like the integer was. It's special, it's not a string. Right? Because I could have just as easily done something like this. And now it's not blue, it's a string. Okay, so that's important. Starting to get your eyes set up to catch those types of things are going to make your life easier in the future. All right, so I did something weird here, right? I said something equal to a Boolean, and then I said something equal to a string. And JavaScript's all good with that. Does that hurt anybody's heart?
Yeah.
Yeah. So anybody who's a big Java person and a big C person who's used to strong typing, this is painful because you're switching the variable from one thing to another. TypeScript is much more like Java. It won't let you do this type of thing unless you say just let it be anything. It's literally the word any. But generally speaking, JavaScript will let you switch between these, which can be useful. Like there's some cases where your coding can get easier to read and smaller because you can do this type of manipulation. But generally speaking, it's bad because I might think that it's okay for me to assign it to a string when it's not. I intended for it to be a Boolean. And now I'm going to use it later as a Boolean. And if I tried to see if something is true, so it's not explicitly true, but it will pass the if statement. I think. I don't generally try to do bad practices, so sometimes I'm wrong about this, but I'm pretty sure it was true.
So what does it read as? And this if statement is reading as if it's not null or what?
So that if statement is, it's asking is it truthy or falsy. And truthy means it represents something that is truth-like, which is to say that it's true-like, which is to say it's non-absent, so like a string, or it's a 1 and not a 0. So like 0 will be represented as false, 1 will be represented as true. Any larger number than 1 I think actually comes out as true. Let me try that. Yep. So it was true, and then if I do 0, it doesn't get there. It's false. Okay. So any integer that's not 0 responds true. 0 is false.
Mm-hmm.
Any string gets treated as true. Okay. Now, so that's just a weird thing about JavaScript. Just good stuff to know. All right. So now, what if I do something like something equals 1 and something else equals 1, and then I console log something equals something else. What am I going to get? True. Okay. Let's change this to be that. What am I going to get?
I think you also get true because you're using the double equal sign, right? Not the triple equal sign.
Man, you know I'm not loving this. That should be
Most commonly used language in the world.
It should be at least turned into like the character value.
Yeah. Okay.
Unicode.
Okay. So JavaScript, what it's looking for is does it represent the same location in memory, which is very technical. The thing to remember in the end for practical purposes is always use triple equals when you're evaluating things, which will check to make sure that not only are they almost the same, and what I mean by almost is like 1 and 1 there are almost the same thing, but it'll make sure that they're exactly the same thing if you use triple equals. So this will make sure that they're actually the exact same location in memory. Okay, so I'm literally pointing to the same thing, and a string of 1 and a number of 1 don't point to the same place in memory. But if you do 1 and 1, so everything's an object in JavaScript, and so 1 and 1 are actually the same location in memory on the computer because they're just pointing to a single 1 location on the computer. So if you do 1 and 1, it's going to say, yeah, we're pointing to the same place when we do equals equals equals. But if we do equals equals, it just says, are they generally of the same type of object? Are they almost the same?
Wow.
So triple equals is your friend. You always want to use triple equals. Everybody cool with that? Okay. That's a great starter pack to get into the FL stuff that we're going to do tomorrow. Cool? Questions? Comments? Concerns? Yeah. No, it's good. I mean, and this is part of just getting exposed to languages. Like you guys are going to see, because all of you will see this, because we're going to use vanilla JavaScript, we're going to use TypeScript, and we're going to use Rails. So you're going to get exposed to at least 3 different languages and frameworks, and you're going to see that they're slightly different in terms of how they do some things. As you'll find across all languages, it's the same sorts of things that are slightly different across all frameworks, but in general, it's all the same. In the end, what we're going to see and what we're going to walk through this first week is there's variables, there's if-else statements, so switch, ones or zeros, there's loops, so you can do things over and over and over again, and there's functions. And once you understand those things, you've got programming. You can do pure functional programming. You can build everything. Anything that you can think of can be built with those 4 components. Honestly, technically, everything could be built with the 3, which you can think about as being able to pass a variable as a parameter into a loop, and then being able to do something with it in terms of a decision tree. I'm going to go this way, I'm going to go that way, if else. Okay? If you have those 3 things, you can technically build anything. Your code's just going to get real ugly real fast. So we're going to talk about functions and how that makes your life easier, and then we're going to talk about classes and how object-oriented programming can make your life even easier in certain circumstances. Does that make sense? 3 things, all you need to do anything that a computer can do. What's awesome about it when you think about it is it helps you to understand what computers are really good at. Mm-hmm. Computers are really good at very quickly moving down a decision tree, right? You're giving it initial input data, and then it has to output a response, but maybe there's a lot of different decisions that have to be made along the way. And it's really good at doing the same thing over and over and over and over again, which is what loops do. Okay, so you do the same thing over and over and over again. You're just changing what the data is that goes through each time. That makes sense? Mm-hmm. So when you're thinking about what can I build with a computer, well, lots of things. But what are computers really good at? It's making decisions really quickly and doing things over and over and over again. Make sense? Mm-hmm. Cool. All right. That's it for today. We'll catch back up again tomorrow. We'll do if-else statements. We'll probably get into loops, would be my guess. And then Wednesday, we'll probably get to functions. I'm sorry. And Friday, we'll probably get to functions. And then we will probably, because Rails is better at this, we'll transition to Rails. We'll do that over again. But we'll get into classes when we get to Rails, because it's actually an object-oriented framework. Okay. Sounds good. See you, Ben.